Hey everyone, it's Anya. Welcome to my channel, the season of Anya, where we are bringing a collective of witches, empaths, yogis, and everyone else in between through embodying a beautiful, magical life through the practices of yoga, magic, and witchcraft. Today, I am so honored to have Marshall, aka Witch of the Southern Light. We are going to talk about this heck of a book that I got the privilege to read, The Diary of an American Witch. Specifically in the theme of which he discusses, claiming power in a powerless world. So, welcome, Marshall.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yay. So, Marshall explores many of these ideas in his book, Diary of an American Witch, which blends personal stories with reflections on practicing witchcraft in everyday life. Yes, what stood out to me most about the book is basically how witchcraft is for change. I feel, very beautifully discuss two topics very well. Witchcraft for personal power, witchcraft for the people, on top of other things. But what I really enjoyed about reading this book, especially as a practitioner myself, is witchcraft works.
Yeah, that that's definitely true. I know I've had some of my own experiences where, you know, you take a leap of faith, you work an act of magic, and then you stand back and you actually watch it take effect. It's pretty amazing to experience.
It is. And sometimes especially whether like people are new on this journey or even me, like as somebody who has definitely like seen some things and experienced some things, it's a good reminder to know that like strictly like truly speaking, like it's not BS. Energy is real, magic is real, that flow, that manipulation, whatever you want to call it, is real. It just takes practice, it takes belief, and it takes faith. And also on a global level, especially where we are in this world, it takes the collective. It's not just about you or me or anyone. It's about, okay, how can witches gather and make the world a better place? And
Definitely.
yeah, you illustrate that very well. So to start, let's go ahead and start with the self, personal power, because I think that's definitely what draws people into witchcraft in the first place. A lot of people come basically moments when they feel stuck, powerless, or, just hopeless. And oftentimes we're seeking tools for that change. So I'm curious, can you share a story about a time when practicing witchcraft helped you transform a difficult moment into your life and reclaim your personal power?
There's it was funny when I was looking through this question, like several different things came to mind, and some of them are written in the book, which is great to talk about since we're talking
Yes,
about the
I'm
book
like,
today. I honestly, my first spell ever is something that sticks with me. The first spell that I ever cast was a freezer spell from Silver Ravenwolf's Teen Witch. I mean, I was like 12. Yeah, it must have been like 12, possibly 13 years old. And I remember at the beginning stages of getting into witchcraft, and this is back in the 90s, so witchcraft and Wicca were synonymous at the time. There really was no separation, at least here in America, and what information we had available. So I'd gotten a few different books that I was starting to study, and I didn't have any teachers, and I don't know. I kind of felt, I was young. I was very bullied. I was effeminate. I wasn't out yet. I wasn't even out to myself yet as a gay man. I was still kind of figuring out who I was and really recognizing that the spirituality that I grew up in, which was Episcopalian for the most part, there was something about it where everything that I was learning through and was exposed to it was I mean, there was a lot of shame involved. There was a lot of this is what you're supposed to be like. This is not what you're supposed to be like. This is a sin. These thoughts you're having are sin. And it was very dampening of my own personal power, if that makes sense. And I remember I had an experience where, honestly, I mean, this is a young mind of thoughts going on right here. So keep that in mind when I share this story. Um, I we traveled to class from class and middle school to, from math to history to whatnot, and I'd carry my stack of books with me, and one of them happened to be Silver Ravenwolf's Teen Witch. And, people would see it and they would ask me about it. And I was excited to talk about it because it was fulfilling me in a way that my previous spirituality that I was raised in was not. Unfortunately, in a conservative small town in the suburbs of Texas, that was not received very well. And, it kind of added to the bullying. But not only to add to the bullying, it kind of also added to an air of fear. And kids were going home and talking to their parents about it. Parents were calling up the school about it. My parents didn't yet know of my interests because I wasn't talking to them because I was still kind of afraid. Um, but I remember one day I got called into the sixth grade head teacher's office or her classroom, and I walked in and there were several teachers gathered. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. Like, what's going on? And I'd actually, reported some of the bullying that was going on. And I thought, oh no, we're going to talk about the reports that I had made. We're going to figure out what's going on. I sit down and I realize very quickly that's not what's happening. What's happening is parents were calling into the school because they were concerned about talks of witchcraft. And I was like, oh, this is not exactly what I thought this was going to be about. And um, you know, it was stern, but also somewhat compassionate. One of the teachers I now know with an adult lens, I think, was trying to protect me. But the other teachers were not really having it, especially the head one. She basically said, I want all of this talk of witchcraft and voodoo dolls and curses. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Curses. And I could tell that the verbiage that she was using was based off of the fear response from kids and their parents. They said, I want all of this to stop. I don't want you to bring these books into class anymore. I don't want you talking about it, and I don't want the kids talking about it. And if this continues to escalate, we're going to have to call your parents. And there were a lot of things going through my mind at the time, like, so I can't bring any of my religious material to school, but anyone else can bring a Bible or wear crosses. I had a little hidden pinnacle that I wanted to wear, but we had a whole school dress code where jewelry and depictions of the occult uh, 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 on whatever you're wearing in the dress code was not allowed. So, I mean, now that's not even something they can legally do because it would be against the First Amendment. But for me, this was really scary. Understanding that I was not to be protected, but instead I was made to be the problem. And if I didn't fix the problem, I was going to have to get my parents involved. So I went home. I scoured through my books and I found Silver Ravenwolf's freezer spell. Now, it's not indicative to her alone. This is a very, very common spell. It's been around for decades. And so I decided to do this spell where I wrote down my situation on paper in as much detail as possible. I put it in a baggie and then I put the baggie in a piece of Tupperware with full of ice and water, and then I put it back in the freezer. It was very simple. It was a very simple act of sympathetic magic. This situ this situation is problematic. I want to put it on ice. Within days, a lot of the talk died down. Teachers never called me in again. There were no more problems with parents calling in, and they never called my parents in. So for me, as a sixth grade 12-year-old
Yeah.
who got into witchcraft because I felt I had no personal power or agency within my own spirituality as a bullied kid in school, it was the first time that I was able to perform an act of magic and feel the not repercussions, but the cause and effect of it working for me.
I love that. And also, kind of shout out to Silver Ravenwolf for even having freezer spells. I feel like that's actually,
Listen, Silver Ravenwolf, I think gets poo-pooed on a lot by modern practitioners because they're reading work without thinking about the time period in which it was published.
yeah,
Like in one of her books, she talks about the fact that she came out as a pagan in her work and she was fired, and it was totally legal. Like it was absolutely discriminatory, and there were no cases yet where she was able to sue and get her job back. And mind you, she didn't want it because it became a hostile work environment. Um, so when she wrote many of the things that she did, we were experiencing a very different world in a very different time. So I always think when we go back and read older publications, we need to keep in mind the context of the time period in which they were written because that really does matter.
And without getting too tangenty, but even hear you like reading the book is one thing, but also hearing you really emphasize points about the time period. Also, yeah, in the South, I mean, in a suburb of Texas,
Yeah.
no less. I mean, witchcraft is, first of all, still like, very, very feared in today's time. And look how far we've come in global acceptance. But then you
Mhm.
put yourself into, the reader, and we all put ourselves into your shoes while reading this story. And it's like, oh my gosh, I mean, really, it's like how more taboo as a young child could you have felt?
I
A
mean,
gay witch.
a gay and a witch. Yes, I know. And I didn't come out till high school, like freshman year of high school, but like I grew up in a town where when you meet someone, part of the first conversation that you have with them is them asking, "What church do you go to?"
Right.
And that is it's not an if, it's a what. What church do you go
Mm,
to? So, and I came from a very mixed background. Like my mom was Episcopalian because her mother was. My dad was atheist. He was born in the Philippines and raised in Singapore, which had very different exposure of different types of spiritualities.
yeah.
Mom's father was from an Orthodox Jewish family. So his marriage put a huge split in our family. I was very exposed to a lot of different um, exposures, foods, cultures. It was a beautiful thing to be exposed to because I feel like when you are exposed to many different diverse cultures and have those experiences, especially at a young age, they don't seem out of the norm to you. But if you grew up in a small town and your only exposure is what church do you go to? And having a stock answer because you do, like that is a very different experience to have. So I'm very, very grateful and lucky that I was born into the family that I was, and they were so accepting and nurturing of the many of the choices that I made and the person who I ended up being. But I was not surrounded by that. So that was definitely a big hurdle for me to come through.
Absolutely. And back on the topic of personal power, so that
Yeah.
experience of bringing it, doing your freezer spell, seeing, wow, witchcraft's this actually works. How was that for you on your personal journey? What did it teach you about the nature of power, personal power itself?
It was groundbreaking. Like having the opportunity, not the opportunity, having the experience of dipping your toes in a pond and having the pond turn around and be the most, warm, welcoming waters. When my previous experience with spirituality was not warm, it was not welcoming.
Yes.
There may be a lot of love bombing, but it comes with a lot of conditions. And one of the beautiful things about witchcraft is that there weren't conditions. The condition was you come as you are. That's it.
Gosh, that's actually very true and very beautiful. And I think that's why, not that's why, but that's exactly why it attracts so many different people because you don't have to follow a social mold. You don't have to follow a physical mold. You don't have to follow a mold. It's really just the desire to be in tune, to be connected, and also for the times, right? I mean, I think only now is really the time where we can say, yeah, witchcraft is, we can use it for the collective because it's been around a little bit. But I mean, Silver Ravenwolf couldn't, we keep bringing her up, but she's a prominent, you reference her a lot in your book. Um, and it's so refreshing to see authors now kind of be like, hey, let's see where we can take this on a more, let's even say national level, which is already, dreaming pretty big. But I mean, I feel like global too. I feel like it's only a matter of time. Um, so with that, do you think personal power ultimately is something that people discover or something they have to build through practice? Especially in your instance, you're 12 years old, sixth grade, you're doing this like for the first time, you know?
I think it's a mixture of the two. You can't really have one without the other. You
Yeah.
first have to discover you first have to discover it. Like you have to get to know yourself. You have to start asking yourself a lot of questions, being curious about what your desires are, not what the desires or personality traits that society tells you you're supposed to fit the mold of, but the ones that actually exist within you. If you could be alone on an island, nobody else is there to judge you, who would you be? Like, these are questions I don't think I ask myself as a 12-year-old, but as an adult now, I can think about these things in a more mature, a more matured brain. Like, I can think about dropping a little bit of the ego and the sense of self and start thinking about, well, not sense of self, I'm trying to figure that part out, but like trying to drop some of the ego and kind of thinking about, well, who am I? I read this book a while back that really stood out to me, and I don't agree with all the aspects of it. It was called The Untethered Soul.
Oh,
One of the
yeah.
first chapters, have you read it?
Yes, it is a great one.
I mean, it is a boundary pusher, and I remember the whole first chapter was, "Who are you?" And the first response is, "Well, I'm Marshall." Really? Are you a string of 8 letters? Well, no. Well, who are you? I'm a hairstylist. Really? You spend every waking moment doing hair? Well, no. Well, then who are you? And the whole point of the entire chapter is an exercise in understanding that you are the observer of your experience. And
Yes.
I think many of us get really lost in all those minutia points of who we tell people we are, who we tell ourselves we are,
Mhm.
until we get down to the point that we actually sometimes have to sit in the seat of observation and experience the world, not just experience it to figure out how we're going to respond. The same way we do in conversations.
Absolutely. And I feel like that lends something too to the fact where it's like, okay, so at least me, something that is very big on my journey as well is, I mean, my journey is the transformation journey just as much. So witchcraft for personal power has been like huge for battling that
Huge.
ego. And this also helps kind of bridge to the next like topic, if you will, but also being able to realize that you can change, once we've been on this path for a while, being able to realize, oh, once I drop the ego, once I align myself with a new thought process, or even really with a new ego, maybe, we challenge our ego. This is what I've been told, right? In your book, or in your experiences, you talk about, hey, I've been bullied, I've been teased, I've been that. I mean, that we can cling on to those thoughts for dear life. But then when we realize, hey, wait a minute, yes, this is maybe all we've known, but then being able to see, oh, but this other path is open. It opens a whole new world. Um, so when somebody begins reclaiming their personal power, how do you think that power should be directed to something larger than themselves?
I think about when it comes to personal power, like I love that old saying, like, it takes a village. It takes a village. It
Yeah,
takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to do this.
yeah.
The thing is a lot of people will a lot of people will approach this with the concept of I need a village, but they don't want to be a villager. That is something that I find, especially in America, and that is one of the reasons
Mm,
why I put the word American in here because
yeah.
one of the biggest perspectives as Americans is the clinging to of individuality that we experience. The soloness that so many of us approach life in a hyper-capitalistic society that thrives in competition. Let me rephrase, not thrives, but pushes competition because we do not
Yes.
all thrive in competition. And I think if we took a step back and looked not only historically but worldwide, language that like, aunties, uncles, cousins, we use those as direct understandings in the English language, especially in America, as direct relatives. But in many other communities, they were your neighbor. They were your parents' best friends. Family was your village, and your village was your family because you worked together as a community. Like this still happens today around the world in a lot of communities in other places, but not a whole lot in America because we are so hyper individualized. And I think we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, how can I be a good villager? It does, of course, start with taking care of yourself. You have to start with getting yourself on solid ground. You cannot go around helping everyone else, helping the world, helping the village if you are on shaky ground to start with. Very much like, you put your mask on when you're in an airplane if it drops down before you put on your child, because if you pass out before you can help them, everyone's screwed. Like this is part of what it's going to take. So when it comes to reclaiming personal power in witchcraft, one of the greatest things is that there are so many aspects of magic that you can do to help yourself. You can help yourself with prosperity magic if you want to bring in stability in finances. You can help yourself in aspects of the home if you need to get organized. You can help yourself in aspects of a job if you are feeling like my work life is unstable. You can help yourself in aspects of romance if you're wanting to attract someone in your life that you're searching for to create a partnership with. Um, on the other hand, and let's be really honest, you can also use it in the process of justice work, work that is justified. You can work it in aspects of bringing down people in your community who are trying to hurt the oppressed. Not you be the oppressor, but working on taking down the oppressor. One of
Yes.
the biggest aspects historically is the fact that many practitioners of yesteryear, they were on the margins. They were the
Yeah.
oppressed peoples. They were the people who were the have-nots. And they had no problem sending curses to the king. They had no problem, healing someone who was sick and sending it on the way or down the street to someone who was a horrible villager. Like, this is one of those things that when it comes to the benefic and sinistral aspects of magic, it's one side. I mean, it's one coin with two sides, and part of that is learning all of that. Does that mean that if you don't feel comfortable doing curse work, you have to? It does not. But you should know about it. You should know what your options are, and you should know if you find yourself with no other recourse, you have options.
Yes, that is so beautifully put, Marshall. And something as a kindred spirit of kind of, what to do next, right? Because I feel like on the witch's journey, we read, we do gain, and then we get to that point where we're like, oh, my mask is on. Now what? Now what? Now what? And it never feels like we're doing enough. And you do such a beautiful job, at just bringing awareness to that in your writing in this book, because I do believe
Thank
that
you.
as witches, as people who are able to be conduits of energy and personal power, it is our moral obligation. That's a whole different conversation, but I think you do a really good job at being like, look, this works, and look what else we can do now. It's not, I think a lot of times people think in society, or even maybe with magic, that it's finite, right? But don't you agree that like the more you use it, the more you share it, the stronger it becomes?
Absolutely. And the more you practice with it, the more you fine tune the details of it. Because as
Ooh.
you've read throughout this book, I've made mistakes. I wasn't specific enough. I didn't take in all aspects of what the outcome might be. And some of these mistakes had some mediocre outcomes. Sometimes they had more dire outcomes. Um, I have regrets about things that I've done when I was experimenting with my practice. And because of those, I know better now. Um, Here's the thing. I don't necessarily think mistakes are a bad thing to make. I think that we are human and a process of learning is to learn from your mistakes. Part of letting that ego go is taking ownership of your mistakes, accountability, and trying to move forward, making sure they don't happen again.
And I think you do a really good job at illustrating that. I mean, even in your book, I think a lot of times, even like a new practitioner who's leaning in may hear, the C word curse, and it's like this is, and you're like, no, this is justified. And you share a few different stories of like, yeah, this did not go according to plan, or like you misread the energy in one of those stories, or misread what like happened and didn't like have the full story. And it's like, oh
Yeah,
crap, like that backfired. And typically, right, it tends to backfire mostly on the practitioner, I would say.
definitely. Um, Was there a question?
Sorry.
No, my internet was unstable and it was showing that it was unstable. I apologize.
No,
My
that's
computer
okay.
sometimes connects to my neighbor and not me, which is very annoying.
Ooh, no worries. Moving it along, so witchcraft has historically belonged to people navigating hardship and uncertainty. In the political and social climate we're living in now, with so much turmoil in the world, how do you think reconnecting with the unseen and inner power truly benefits the collective?
To be perfectly honest, I think, and this kind of it sounds like it's going to be contradictory to what I just said, but connecting to your inner power makes you sit on more solid ground from
Right,
the seat of your observation. When I talk about being the observer of your experience, when you feel like you are on more solid ground, you can be more helpful to the people around you. It
right,
is really, really hard to help others that are struggling while you can't even get to the point to get there. If you
right.
can't get to someone's home to help them, how are you going to help them? You have to start by helping yourself, and you have to start by um, taking a step back and usually beginning local. I know one of the big things that we see nowadays, especially in social media, especially on the internet, especially when it comes to politics, and witchcraft is political, we see a lot of this, and I even write about this in the book. We'll have a whole lot of like hex the patriarchy, hex Trump, you know, uh, hex these political figures. And I think, hey, great, go for it, do it. But at the same time, that's a large pedestal for us to reach as an individual, all the way over here. I think if we start local a little bit more, we can actually start making local change first. That local change affects the grander change. That grander change affects the much larger change. I live in Texas. So I live in a city that luckily is much more on the, progressive side of things, which is very, very lucky for me. So when it comes to, say, like local elections, I like to put sigils in my posts. I like to grab some dirt from the crossroads or polling place to affect these things. So when you start going local, when you start, I mean, this isn't even witchcraft, this is just voting local. And I'm always going to advocate that people to vote. Don't just vote every 4 years. Vote every opportunity. Vote for your local sheriff. Who's on your local town council? These are things that can affect you directly. And
Yes.
all government and all aspects of power are way more trickle up than we give them credit for. This can be a government thing. This can be your local friend group. This can be your local knitting circle.
Yes.
Like these are things that we as community can do that bring power into things. I remember I had a friend talk about she joined a crocheting circle, and sometimes they would say prayers as they knit, or
Oh,
yeah, as they crocheted. And so they're saying these prayers as they're knitting, they're saying these prayers as they're crocheting. And they would a lot of times do baby blankets that they would donate to a local children's hospital. And I'm just thinking about, well, I wouldn't necessarily describe that as witchcraft. I would absolutely describe that as spiritual magic. I would describe that as putting your intention through word into an action, into a physical thing that you are now gifting to someone. These are things that we can do not only for ourselves, but for others. These are things that we can spread. I remember when I went to Salem last year, there was a class by Lou the Death Witch, and there was a whole bunch of slides on how we can work magic to help protests, how we
mhm.
can work magic to keep areas safe. We can work magic for police invisibility. These are all things that can be so helpful to our communities right now. Spell bundles were one of my favorite things that I saw. And I literally took a picture of it because I was like, I want to start doing these where you write a spell, an intention, a few herbs, you wrap it up in string around a little stick, super simple, a
Yeah.
little bundle of a spell, leaving them in really poignant places, leaving them at polling places to attract progressive voters, leaving it near police stations to make them less noticeable of petty crime. You can leave it at places where you hear ice might be coming soon.
Hey, real talk.
Whenever ice shows up in my city, I mean, the word spreads so fast. We will get a notification from a friend. I saw ice at this mall. I saw ice at this local place. As a salon, when state board shows up, we get texts from other salons to let us know, hey, state board's in the area because
Yep.
we're looking out for each other as a
Yeah.
community. And we can do that with our magic too.
Gosh, I mean, that is so like much beauty about the collective that we could unpack here. I mean, isn't half of it just having that bundle of simply like even in the most simplest form, right? You called it spiritual magic, but even isn't just having that bundle of energy just gifted to someone? I mean, could you imagine if we learned as a society how to spread that to people again, right? Just not just fellow witches, not just people in our family, but people in our communities, handing things out for people in need, but also signs of hope. I mean, part of it I feel like is we could do a really, yes, let's get to the local level. Something you also mentioned too about voting now, especially at the time that this video is coming, will be coming out, signing petitions. I find myself very guilty where well, we're checking ourselves on that guilt and that privilege. I'm like, oh, I don't have time to do it. It's like, girl, we never have time to do it. Just get your ass over there, sign the petition. Just do it. I've rolled my eyes twice, but I've done them both times because I'm like, okay, girl, you know better. But again, right? And then that in turn, right? Even like, yes, we're not doing maybe like a full-on ritual, but that's empowering a movement. That person's been sitting over there. Okay, yes, keep going, keep going, keep going. I just feel like there's so many, I feel like as witches, we're really on the precipice of finding out how we can empower the community as a whole while, taking down authority. And it's a pretty fascinating place to be, quite honestly.
It absolutely is.
I'm stoked for it. I really am. I feel like these types of conversations need to be more of mainstream witchcraft. And you do such a beautiful job in your book again about being like, look, it works. So like, what are we doing? It works. Come on, come on. Um, I mean, do you feel that witchcraft is emerging through the struggles that many people are facing today? Do you feel like that's why these practices are starting to resonate and we've seen that resurgence?
I have seen way more people be less interested in institutionalized spirituality
Mm,
and much more interested in spirituality as a concept itself.
yeah.
Um, I- and I know that there are a lot of articles and I mean, I literally remember just reading an article the other day and it was just like Gen Z, the highest growing number of young Catholic. Why are Gen Z turning to Catholicism? And I'm like, well, that seems like a very leading headline. And you look at it and it's a few people they interviewed. There's a statistic about a uptick in younger people turning back to Catholicism. Personally, I think people are interested. I think they're much more interested in taking more accountability for their own spirituality instead of falling in line with the spirituality that their families passed down to them.
Mm,
I think that's actually what's really happening right now. I do think that 2020 was the peak of especially online witchcraft,
yeah.
of this huge surge. I think the quarantine and the experience that we were all going through that time period when we were all on the internet, all online, all the time, that was the height of witch talk. That was the height of the amount of people who were getting into, and that was also the switch over from Tumblr witchcraft over to witch talk and witchcraft
Mm.
on TikTok. There are these big social movements that happen in the online community and the sphere of the web that I find interesting to look back and watch because I do think that that has deeply dwindled since 2020. The amount of views that I think witch talk creators get has dropped significantly. I do think that there are some people who are still really big on there, and they're pumping out content, and I'm so grateful and I love that they do this. But I just remember the amount that was out there that has really dwindled down because we're not stuck in our homes anymore. We're not fighting. the QAnon conspiracies about a pandemic. Like these were things where it hit its height. And then the people that stuck with it stuck with it. The people that were going through passing phases had their phase and moved on. I do think that we're probably at an all-time high then. When I speak about that, I mean worldwide, of people who might identify as pagan or as occult related. And I want to use those words very specifically because I do know a lot of magical practitioners who identify as Christian because they're Catholic folk practitioners, they're Protestant folk practitioners. Um, and while they may identify not as pagan, they still are practicing magic. And then you also have dual faith practitioners who might um, they might be doing witchcraft with the planets on a Saturday or Saturday, and they might be going to church on Sunday, because historically that's actually very accurate of most cunning people. Um, I'm very curious to see where it will be in 10 years because the evolution of magic and specifically witchcraft is a fascinating thing to watch, considering what we were exposed to, the information we had, say, in the 80s and 90s versus what we have now. I still remember when, if you wanted to buy the next book on witchcraft, you had to order it from the back pages of the Llewellyn book that you got when you happened to get it last time. It was wild.
That's crazy. See, I didn't have, I definitely reminisce in some of the experiences you share of early childhood about like stirring, rocks and stuff and water
Oh,
and
the
making a
parsley in the
potion.
styrofoam cup. Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
in the backyard and stuff. But I never had access to this at an early age. And it's pretty impressive that despite your mom being, you said Protestant, right? You know,
Yeah.
gave
A
you,
bit, it was
allowed
Episcopalian, but it's a
Episcopal.
Protestant.
But like, allowed you to explore that and you've already seen like really lived the evolution of it, which, poses a question, right? Like what do you think we can do to gain a little bit of that momentum back? I know this is like off script, but we're rolling with it. But a little bit of that momentum and showing practitioners that, yeah, it's not just about witch talk or like, the aesthetic stuff. It's about getting out there. I know you've mentioned voting and stuff, but is there anything else out there that you feel like you're called to when you go out there every day to try to either raise the vibration or raise the collective energy, anything like that that resonates with you that practitioners could start trying?
Yes, well, many of the things that I think of when you ask that question have very little to do with witchcraft and more to do with how we interact with people on a daily basis. I'm a hairstylist. I
Yeah.
am touching people 4 days a week for about 9 to 10 hours a day. My hands are on their head. My scissors are in my hand. They are sharing with me things that they might not even be telling their best friend because I'm a stranger, I'm removed, and they have the opportunity to vent, sometimes ask advice, sometimes just to speak because they don't have someone at home who's listening to them. I think a lot of times, if we gave each other the opportunity to listen, not to consider how you're going to respond, but
Mm-hmm.
just to hear. And me and my friend, we have this thing where sometimes when they say like, "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" and I'm like, "Do you want?" Okay, perfect. Are you looking for fluff or tough? And
Mm.
sometimes it's I just need some fluff right now. I just need to be heard. I need to be validated. And I'm like, that's totally cool. You talk. Let me be here for that person for you. And sometimes the answer is, I need tough right now. I need a honest, like removed answer from someone who's going to be unbiased. And when you ask these questions, like, hey, are you looking to vent right now, or do you need some tough real life advice? Do you need like an unbiased opinion? Um, Asking that advance, I think, is something a lot of people don't think they need to do. And I'm going to be really honest with you, men are terrible at this.
Mm.
Someone will come up to them and complain about an experience they had, and men are so quick to want to be Mr. Fix-It. Here's what you can do, A, B, or C. That's not what this is about. This is about me venting. This is about me letting off the steam. This is about me just needing to speak the thing out loud that's bothering me. And I honestly won't be bothered anymore once I've spoken it. I think if we as a community started approaching life that way, the way we interact with people, many people are carrying around a lot of baggage, all the time. And many times we're so lost in that baggage, we don't notice the person right next to us is carrying their own baggage. I think if we started seeing people like that more, we might connect to each other a lot better, especially when it comes to the internet, the way that people respond to each other as if, have you ever heard of the bean soup theory?
Remind me. I think so.
It was this video of a woman who was all she does is put out recipes, and she was doing a bean soup recipe, and then she did this beautiful video, her whole recipe of this gorgeous bean soup, and then you open the comments and it says, I don't like beans. What can I do to substitute beans? I don't have beans. I don't have access to beans. And it's just like, you, then this soup is not for you. This soup was not about you. This soup was about this video was about bean soup. If you don't like bean soup, don't worry about it. I have a million other recipes without beans. And I do find that sometimes the way that we interact with each other is very much what about me?
Mm.
And sometimes while that may be appropriate in certain situations, many times we look for that thing to bring it back. And sometimes it just doesn't need to be about me right now. Sometimes it needs to be about the person who enjoys the bean soup. Let them enjoy the bean soup. Because you know what? I can have chicken noodle. That's totally cool. And I think of, and I promise you that not really about witchcraft as much as it's about community. But you can bring that aspect of witchcraft to community. One of the things that I like to do is I like to make jewelry. I like to make jewelry and I like to sometimes enchant them. So, in the book, I talk about a necklace that I made for my mother. And it was literally just a happiness necklace. It was a necklace to enhance the experience of feeling joy whenever you wear it. It was a very simple charm. And I used my object enchantment spell that I wrote in there. And in the process of writing about it, in the book, I share some of her stories so people can know more about her. And then I share the spell that I used to enchant this necklace to give it the assignment to just enhance joy. I feel like that's something that we can do for all the people in our lives. Um, and it's your choice whether or not you tell them that's what it's for.
Ooh, I like that. Okay, so Marshall, like about like with strangers as well, right? So we're talking about our mom, we're talking about our friends and our community and holding space for them. What about, say, the random clerk at the grocery store?
I actually always am reminded when people talk about this subject, I'm reminded of a Dolly Parton quote that I always think about. And there was one thing she said, and it was, if you see someone without a smile, give them yours. And I think about that a lot because, as I said before, we're all carrying around baggage. And the amount of times that I think, if I can walk around my community and leave behind a smile or a feeling of gratitude in others, that's a success. That's not a success for me. That's a success for my community. So like I meet new strangers every day who come into my salon, sit in my chair and trust me to make them feel good about themselves. So a lot of times that involves really allowing them the opportunity to open up, allowing them the opportunity to let their guard down. And I think when it comes to strangers, many of us, who grew up on stranger danger, which honestly, rightfully so sometimes, like when I go to the grocery store, I think about like, am I holding the door for people? Am I allowing my elders to get the basket first? I got there first. Let me pick up a basket and hand it to them so I can get my own. Um, when I am checking out, I am always making sure to say thank you and have a good day. I mean, these are, again, it's not really about witchcraft. It's about the energy you put out into the world.
Yeah.
Because I promise you, if you are going to somewhere where people are working in some sort of service industry, they are dealing with crappy people a lot. And so making sure that you are not going to be one more crappy person in their life, you as an individual are not going to add more baggage to other people's lives in your village. Um, if you don't have to. I mean, sometimes, you intermingle with the baggage. But if you don't have to, and I think sometimes people who carry baggage around, it weighs us down. And sometimes we let that seep out into how we treat other people. Sometimes when we're really stressed, we can, you can have an outburst. That happens to the best of
It
us.
does. It surely does.
It does, but do you take accountability and apologize for it afterwards?
Right.
Do you think about something you might have said that came off the wrong way and be like, "Oh, I'll get over it"? Or do you go and say like, "Hey, I just want you to know what I said earlier, that was not my intention. I'm so sorry. I'm sure it made you feel a certain type of way. That was not my intention, and I just want you to know I apologize for it." Because I think a lot of people will go through a large portion of their life not apologizing unless someone asks for an apology. I think being self-aware enough to know, ooh, I don't like the way that interaction happened. I'm going to let them know that I'm sorry for that because they shouldn't have to wait for the apology. Um, Leading by example is, I think, the best way we as individuals can actually become a better villager. Be the person you want to be best friends with. Be the person you would hope to speak to and be a confidant to. If you want to be, if you want to have someone who's a confidant to you, are you a confidant to them? Are
Mm.
you going to give them the same energy? And it's not transactional. It can't be transactional. If it's, I'm only going to do this if you do this for me, then it's not good in the first place. That's not being a villager. That's just being a transactional person. And I think we can do better than that.
I absolutely think we do. And, even right, not, some of the things we mentioned is not technically witchcraft. Maybe it's more spiritual, but that should be part of, and I do see that I do see the trajectory heading that way because with folk magic practitioners and just general concepts and conversations in the community. Because when you think about it, right, when you're truly connected to the world around you, well, first of all, you're not in control. So, right, those transactional things, it's just ebb and flow. It's like, of course, I'm going to show up for somebody. I want them to show up for me. But I truly feel like maybe that's the direction we can get Witch Talk to go someday or sooner rather than later and remind us that it is not transactional. We are here for the people. You cannot truly be connected to the world around you if you're only connected to you and your tribe. It's the world just as much as we connect with the plants. You talk a lot about like spirit of the plants and stuff too in your book, and all sorts of stuff. It's like, yeah, people. We are just it's not about, oh, trauma dumping, this and this or that. It's just about holding space for others. So, with that said, let's move on to our Q&A. Um, what is your favorite story in the book to share with people? What's your favorite like conversation starter with that book, with your book?
Um, you know, I've had some very interesting conversations with people who are not in the magical sphere. And, they're curious. They want to ask questions. And they're like, how does magic work? That's a very common question I sometimes get, or like, do spells actually really work? And my response is absolutely, but not always how you think they're going to. And
Mm,
that's the reality of magic. Everyone expects this sparks and flares and poof, things happen. It's actually way more mundane. The channels that magic takes is very, very mundane. You know, uh, you do a spell to I'll be like, I had a friend. I cast a spell on him to help heal his ankle. It was very sore. He didn't know what was going on. He just thought he sprained it or something, and he didn't really think much about it, and it just kind of got worse. So I did a spell to heal him,
yeah.
and that's when it flared up really bad. And I was like, oh no, what did I do? Oh no, it didn't work. He had to go to the doctor. The doctor diagnosed him with gout.
Ooh.
He had gout in his ankle. He went on a special medication. He changed his diet and it got better. So sometimes the way that magic works is by leading you to the source that's going to heal it. It's sometimes very mundane. Sometimes it is self. If you do a healing spell for someone and all of a sudden their ailment disappears, it absolutely can happen that way. But sometimes an ailment won't go away on its own. Sometimes an ailment or a spirit that you conjure to heal that ailment is going to lead the ailer to the source of healing. And that's sometimes the way we need to understand how magic works. Magic is very much like it's like water. It's flowing down a river. It's going to come across hurdles. It's going to come across tide pools. It's going to come across boulders. It's going to come across thinner areas, deeper areas, wider areas. And sometimes we have to think about here is where I want my magic to end up. Here is where I'm starting. How is it going to make its way there? Sometimes we cast spells that have no road to fruition. Like, imagine if I cast a spell to win the lottery and I never bought a ticket. Like, these are, and that's a very, very large, grandiose example, but the way in which we approach magic needs to be in congruation with the mundane. You know, if you want to sell a house, but you never put your house on the market, it's not going to happen. And if it does, eventually it's going to happen in the weirdest way. You may not want to happen that way.
Yeah, that's true. Because then that's just that's a control mechanism, perhaps a force, something just was not meant to be there, right? It's like put that
Hmm.
intention out there, do the work, and see where life takes you, and stay connected to the energy. Um, let's see. So, what actually inspired you to share some of the more personal stories? Because some of the things you share are quite funny. Like we won't go into it. They're gonna have to read what the Beltane ritual is.
Oh gosh. You know, I keep forgetting that I wrote about, and every time I read edit it, I would be like, "Oh yeah, I forgot I told about this."
It's-
Yes, and I'll just put it this way: it is the night that I survived the burning times. You know, I thought if I was going to write a diary that I share with the world, it needed to be real and it needed to be my real experiences. And I'm a human. I'm gonna have vulnerable experiences. I had vulnerable experiences in the past. They made me stronger. So, and I'll be honest, for a while they made me weaker, but I was able to grow through them. I was able to feel the grief of loss, feel the grief of this experience, feel the sadness of this experience, feel the heartbreak of this experience. Not everything makes you stronger right away. And sometimes, especially now with a more mature mind and more life experience, I can look back on these and just be really honest about what my intentions were. Sometimes they were not good intentions. Sometimes these intentions were very selfish. And I'm gonna be really honest, I don't think selfish magic is bad. I think being selfish about what costs we're willing to pay when it's not us that pays the price is where it becomes problematic. And I share some of those stories in there where the consequences didn't necessarily come to me, they came to other people. The consequences of how, I went about doing a prosperity spell for work and then having a friend who got sick for a week, a coworker who got sick for a week, and then I got all their clients. Like these are again really hard learning experiences sometimes. And I would love if people read this, they could see, okay, this is a good lesson that Marshall had to learn. I don't want to have to.
Right.
And I want people to learn from my mistakes. I have a younger sister, she's 3 years younger. And man, we are so much alike. We made all the same mistakes, but she had an example to learn on how to make them, and she did it anyways. So,
As we do, as we
as
do.
as 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 we do, I thought having those vulnerable moments and personal stories were really important because they were real. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of our real stories are not always the prettiest. They're not always the ones we're the most proud of, but they're the ones that happened. And we can't lie to ourselves that they didn't, because they did. That's my truth. Um, and to be perfectly honest, I hate when people say that's my truth because sometimes it's just an opinion you have based off of a feeling that you are having, which, and my mom said this to me when I was younger, and I still think about it a lot. I actually can't remember if I read it about in this book. I think I might have, but one of the things she said is, Marshall, your feelings are real, but
Mm,
sometimes they're not based in reality. And
mm,
I think there are many times that we build up emotion around situations from a perception, but that perception is not really always based in all the facts.
mm.
Um, when I wrote this book, I had to take a really hard look at some of the memories that I had and ask myself, what was my headspace like when I was experiencing this versus what my headspace is like now, so many years later, that I can look back on it with more objective reality.
Hmm.
That's something that I would love to challenge more people to do. Put our egos aside and instead of looking back at our experiences with, I want to defend this, I want to defend what I did. Maybe I shouldn't be defending what I did. Maybe I
Oof.
should actually be apologizing for what I did. Maybe I should be learning from what I did. Maybe I should be making sure that I don't do that again.
I think a lot of times with the, personal power, right? It's like you hear boundaries, you hear this, you hear that. Exactly. I know my truth. And there's like a humility to it all too that needs to be probably discussed a little bit more. But yeah, I'm with you there. Absolutely. Um, did you like have any idea for when you were going to finish? Were you like, okay, I mean, it ends kind of just so people know the timeline like ends right before, I think right before the election or I know you have the little epilogue.
Mhm.
Was that kind of the goal all along? Like, let's just see where things flow until this specific point?
It was when I started writing it, it was the beginning of October 2023. I
Mhm.
had absolutely no idea what was going to come over the next year. I initially started writing it because I was very inspired by Sybil Leek's Diary of a Witch. And in fact, the first original title was just going to be The Diary of a Witch. And when I finished it, which is about 13 months, because I went through the end of October 2024, I'm very big on 13. All the my books before it, and Cunning Words and The Red Mother, they both have sections, and each section has 13 chapters. I very much believe that 13 is a witch's time between time. And so I wanted it to be 13 months of my life. It is a full year, and then some.
Yep, a year
And
and a day.
so I knew exactly, and another good a reference right there. So I knew I would be writing it from October to end of the next October. When I started it, I didn't think about there being an election. I didn't
Mm.
think about the fact that, you know, we were going to be witnessing a major attack over and one of America, and I'm going to use medium quotations here, America's allies, Israel. And then I had no idea over the next several years, and even literally this is just that one year, watching the escalation that became what we now recognize 100% as a genocide. I didn't know. And I remember writing about this being so afraid because people were being fired for pointing that out. People were losing their jobs. People were losing their homes. People were being removed, censured in Congress for literally just pointing out what was happening. And I just kept thinking, I have to write what I see is going on. And I have to hope that I'm going to be on the right side of history here. And now here we are 4 years later, and I'm so grateful to see that so many perspectives have changed. Eyes are being opened. We are now seeing what's going on. I had no idea that was going to happen. I had no idea that several of my friends were going to come to me and ask me for help magically. I
Yeah.
had no idea that my friend was going to have heart complications that involved open heart surgery, that I was going to do magical healing for his heart for him. But when they happened, I wrote it down. When things weren't happening day to day, I would be reminded of memories that I thought were poignant that I wanted to share. When when I would have I wrote this alongside writing my second book, The Red Mother. And during this process, I would, in the diary, share what was the inspiration for that. I share the fact that I was a stripper when I was like 22 years old, and it was an inspiration for an entire story about sex workers and the magic that is used in a brothel. Like these are experiences I had that I wanted to shine a light on, and I thought that they mattered and people should know. And most importantly, in the very first entry, which actually became the back of my book, who are the witches whose books we read? Because when I first started, I didn't know who Raymond Buckland was.
Hmm.
I didn't know who Scott Cunningham was. I didn't know who Silver Ravenwolf is. And we weren't in a day and age at that time where you could just go on social media and look up things they post. Social media didn't exist yet. So I wanted people who read my work, who follow me on social media, who trust the magic I'm teaching them in Cunning Words, the Red Mother, who are listening to my podcast, Southern Bramble with Austin. I wanted people to know who I was and who they were learning from, and I thought that that was really important. And while I didn't know what was going to come yet, I knew what I had to say was going to share more of me with the world, and I was hoping that was going to be good enough.
Yes. All right, Marshall, final question before we close. What message would you like to share with spiritual seekers, witches, and all sorts, um, where how we can play a role in helping bring healing, justice, and transformation to the world?
You know, I've said this a few times recently, and I think about it a lot. Be curious. I would much rather be curious than right, because I think so many people, I want to take a step back here. I think so many people have a hard time distinguishing the difference between their opinions and their identity.
Mm,
And sometimes when someone challenges your opinion, you're offended by it because you have conflated it with your identity. And I think sometimes if we can take a step back and hold your identity here and allow your opinions to be influenced by facts and new information, new perspectives, new worldviews, this becomes a very fluid thing that is always evolving, adapting, and changing with the more experiences and exposure you have. But once you wrap it around your identity and make it who you are, it becomes inflexible. You have now put walls around the world you are willing to experience. I have conversations with people who have very different opinions with me on a daily basis, and I listen to them. Now, I don't always agree. And sometimes, if they're open, I have the opportunity to share my experience. And if they're open, that slowly starts to influence their opinions and their worldview too. But if all of us are walking around with our identities wrapped around our opinions that are completely unbreakable, unmoldable, unmovable, then what is the point of continuing even living? What is the point if we have already limited the experiences we're willing to have, the questions we're willing to ask? I would much rather be curious when it comes to everyday life, when that comes to witchcraft, when that comes to spirituality. I would rather not start by condemning or poo-pooing, which is something that I grew up in. I would rather start with, tell me more.
yes. Right. When you're being challenged, or when your ego is being challenged, when your thoughts are being challenged, just ask the question. Doesn't mean you have to agree. It doesn't mean anything. Just ask and learn and
Yeah.
listen and
And
listen.
listen.
Right. You guys, I mean, as you can see here, Marshall is just so eloquently put, educated, and like just a true gem. Please do yourselves a favor. Buy that book, Diary of American Witch by Marshall, Witch of the Southern Light. Yes, Diary of an American Witch. Truly, it will challenge your perspective on so many things. Even as a practitioner myself, it was such a beautiful reminder of the power of the collective, the power of witchcraft, and how nothing in this world is set in stone. And so long as we gather, so long as we continue to practice our magic, be good villagers, who's to say what can happen and in how long? So thank you,
Absolutely.
Marshall.
Thank you. And for people who aren't following, please check me out on Threads, on Instagram, Witch of Southern Light, all one word. You can buy my books on Amazon, Cunning Words, A Grimoire of Tales and Magic, The Red Mother, and now, of course, The Diary of an American Witch by Marshall WSL. Thank you so much for having me on. This has been a really delightful conversation. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. Likewise, the pleasure is all mine. And yes, I'll have all the links down below, everyone, and Marshall out. Thank you.
Thank you.